Daniel, there are a lot of poets who are Oulipians, have been, and mathematicians as well. Are there any generalizations? Are poets particularly drawn to the Oulipo, or how would you? I don't know.
In terms of its membership, or in terms of
right, membership. The scientists and writers.
Yeah, the breakdown historically has always been mostly writers, mostly poets or prose writers, and a few mathematicians or linguists or people on the more hard science side of the divide, who are by and large content to stay behind the scenes and sort of blueprint out these magnificent algorithmic or labyrinthine structures that a novel could then be built on.
It's like Q, like James Bond in Q. It's like, I've crafted this weapon.
Not to give the impression that there's any member of the Oulipo who's like anywhere near as dapper or debonair as a James Bond, myself included, or excluded, obviously. And I think that balance between like mostly writers and a few mathematicians has always been constant. Although in the earliest years, the first like half decade, especially before the Oulipo started to recruit new writers, and when it was mostly actually a secret society of people who would basically just meet for lunch once a month and talk about analyzing literature. The emphasis wasn't so much on writing; it was more on reading and thinking about what formulaic patterns or what mechanical, I'll just say patterns again, you could distill and take from works of poetry or prose that you thought were really excellent and could, in theory, potentially use to generate more literature at a later date, if ever. And then once new recruits started coming in, who, especially in the first round of new members, which is the famous round, which is Georges Perec and Harry Matthews and Italo Calvino, these people were all really gung-ho about writing, rather than theorizing about what they could potentially write. And so they were building on this analytical groundwork that was sort of the foundational thrust of the group, and taking those ideas and actually applying them literally. That may not have answered your question at all.
It's all right, but
poetry's really good for this stuff, right? Because poems are basically machines already, anyway, in a certain sense. And like, so the classic Oulipo, the first Oulipo formula that I ever heard of is the very famous basic. What is it? Is it noun plus 7? Is that what it's called, or is that?
Yeah.
So the famous examples, you take the Wordsworth's poem, "I wandered lonely as a cloud," and you go. Is it 7? I don't know.
It's 7, but
some number of entries down in the dictionary. So I wandered lonely as a couch. Through and then every noun gets replaced with the entry that's 7 entries below it or away from it in the dictionary. So, and I think poems are like super amenable to that kind of manipulation because they already have that quality of being a machine. Anyone can my point is that's easy to understand how to do that with a poem.
Yeah, and I think with a poem particularly, but also let's just say a larger work of literature like a novel, if you bother to outline it, that's one of the core ideas, is that it's not this sort of wispy, inspired thing. It's actually a machine that you can tinker with, and you can open the hood and replace this one component with a different component and close the hood again and see how it runs. And that's the really satisfying, like, experimental quality of it. You're actually, you're taking a poem or you're taking some other bit of language and treating it as something that you can run experiments on.
I wonder randomly if you hooked up someone doing one of these challenges to a brain scanner, the dopamine would probably be firing. It seems that we have this urge as humans to be challenged, to do puzzles, so that there's this natural tendency toward love of it.
Yeah.
Well, and it reminds me of the line you wrote also in the beginning when you say it's a way to sub in the left brain for activities we usually think of as being right brain. It's kind of like if your right brain is feeling weak or you just feel like you need more juice, you can like apply the left brain to the task of writing poetry, writing a novel, whatever it is, which is pretty cool.
I think that's particularly visible so the Oulipo runs workshops a lot, and just, the longest is, there's a week in the summer that they've been doing for 8 or 9 years now, where you can just go, you pay a few €100, and you just spend a week with 6 or 7 members of the Oulipo, and they just take you through the rules behind certain constraints that they like to use, including, sonnets and sestinas and things that are not actually Oulipian, they're totally public domain forms, and then also, what it's like to write a text without a certain letter, and what it's like to write a text that, sounds identical to something that's written differently with completely different meaning.
What do they teach you to do that you wouldn't know by just trying to do that?
Nothing really.
They just guide you.
You're just kind of doing it under supervision, and basically under the supervision of people who don't treat it with disbelief. We're not like, this is a ludicrous thing that I'm doing.
Well, there must be a thrill, too, that it's a project, something to work on.
Yeah, and it's what, I participated in that week that I mentioned twice as a participant, and then once I became a member, I led those workshops for a week. And it was really inspiring and instructive to see people, especially people who have just in their everyday lives no interest in the literary industry and just don't consider themselves literary people, but how eagerly they'll take to it. And there are obviously some forms where you're like, this is just pointless and stupid, and I don't see why I should write a text without the letter E. Why shouldn't I, be able to use the whole alphabet? But then you're like, okay, well now write a palindrome, and they just think it's the coolest challenge. And there's this, like, inevitably, or maybe not inevitably, because it's still a group of people who have volunteered to do this sort of thing for a week. But something clicks, and they just have this. There's this moment where you realize that you're doing something that you're not really capable, that you didn't think you were capable of, and you're kind of surprising yourself because you're thinking about completing this one really dumb technical mandate, and then from out of nowhere, your left brain or right brain, the wrong brain, has just done something completely surprising, and then you're sitting there and you're like, I had no idea that I was capable of that.
You mentioned palindromes. That suddenly made me think of A.O. Scott's, of the New York Times, the film critic, his brilliant little capsule review of the film Palindromes by Todd Solondz. I think it was something like backwards or forwards a dud.